The production hell that director George Miller's Mad Max Fury Road faced is a fairly common occurrence in Hollywood. But unlike hundreds of other projects that went through it, Mad Max did not compromise on quality, or at least not as much as it could have. Director George Miller had plans to release the fourth film in the Mad Max franchise back in the late 1980s, but the third Mad Max film, released in 1985, threw off the plans. It cost 4 times as much as the second film, yet its box office earnings only increased by a third. Furthermore, audiences met the new film without much enthusiasm. As a result, George Miller and Mel Gibson decided to take a break and move on to other projects. Gibson almost immediately found his next franchise, Lethal Weapon. Miller, in turn, chose to work in the comedy genre. Shortly after Thunderdome, he was about to direct The Golden Child, but it never happened because of Eddie Murphy. He personally invited Miller to direct the film, but when the director arrived for the meeting, Murphy kept him waiting for more than 5 hours. Feeling offended by such treatment, Miller sent Murphy to hell and focused on The Witches of Eastwick instead. Miller returned to Mad Max in the late 1990s after finishing work on the film Babe, Pig in the City. The director approached everyone in Hollywood with his idea for a new film set in the wasteland, but only 20th Century Fox showed interest. The studio approved the film after reviewing the director's drafts. Mel Gibson was cast as the lead, and filming was set to take place in Australia. However, after the Iraq War began in 2003, the film's production was put on hold as the studio thought it was not the best time for a harsh and bloody apocalypse movie. Mel Gibson didn't wait for the situation to be resolved and left to work on The Passion of the Christ. George Miller, in turn, decided to focus on the animated film Happy Feet for Warner Brothers. The animated film's box office success granted Mad Max a new chance. This time, the project was taken on by Warner Brothers. The studio was so happy with the animated project's box office success that it acquired the film rights from Fox. Happy Feet grossed nearly $400 million worldwide and won the 2006 Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. Everyone was excited and couldn't wait to start filming, but suddenly Mel Gibson's life took a dark turn. He was arrested for driving under the influence. The scandal could have been quickly forgotten, but the actor's anti-Semitic and racist remarks made during his arrest were leaked to the media. Then people remembered his homophobic statements from the 1980s and 1990s, as well as his refusal to apologize for them. Fearing the consequences, Warner Brothers abandoned the project, and Miller focused on the sequel to Happy Feet instead. The next time Mad Max made headlines was in 2010. The filmmakers decided not to engage with Mel Gibson and started looking for another actor to fill the role. Actor Jeremy Renner was very enthusiastic about playing Max for some time, but Miller thought he was too cute, and the role went to Tom Hardy, whom the director chose for his animal charisma. In 2011, Miller and the film crew were about to start filming in the Australian desert, where some of the scenery had already been built. However, their plans were disrupted by torrential rains, which are very rare in those areas. Although it rained for a couple of months, the filmmakers were not too concerned and decided to simply wait it out. But the rain brought about an even rarer occurrence. The entire desert bloomed with grass and flowers. As a result, the post-apocalyptic wasteland started to look way too cheerful. Since waiting for the green blanket to disappear would have taken too long, Warner Brothers decided to shoot in Namibia instead. The crew had to ship all the scenery and vehicles built for the film to Africa, which delayed the film's production for several months. Furthermore, they needed to coordinate the new filming schedules with the lead actors. That's when Teresa Palmer withdrew from the film. She was supposed to play one of the main roles. Palmer is a very unlucky actress in this regard. Due to various problems, she once lost the lead role in the film Jumper. A little later, Warner Brothers canceled George Miller's Justice League Mortal, in which she had already been cast as Talia al Ghul. Furthermore, by accepting the role in Mad Max, she lost the chance to star in a Spider-Man movie, and Emma Stone was cast in her place. After all this, anyone in her position would probably think that the universe was holding some kind of grudge against them. She, by the way, had one of the lead roles in The Grudge 2, at the beginning of her career. Anyway, as a result of all the problems that Fury Road encountered, the film's budget began to spiral out of control. Initially, the film's budget was estimated to be between $100 million and $120 million. Naturally, everyone knew by then that $100 million would not be enough. Therefore, Warner Brothers increased the budget to $150 million and asked Miller to make the film PG-13. In Namibia, the crew was working in emergency mode. They had to constantly interrupt production on the film to resolve issues with filming permits in the country's national parks. Later, Namibian authorities accused George Miller and Warner Brothers of causing irreparable damage to the country's nature. Adding to that, Tom Hardy had a lot of on-set conflicts with Charlize Theron and George Miller. According to Hardy, he couldn't understand what the director wanted from him and how his character should act in certain situations. The actor constantly argued with the director, trying to give his character at least some kind of personality. Because Miller refused to compromise, Hardy simply started humming in the frame. All of this ended up in the movie. At the Cannes Film Festival, before the film's premiere, Hardy publicly apologized to Miller and Charlize Theron for his behavior. The actor said that he was very confused by how the filming went, and he had no idea how brilliant the film would turn out to be. That's understandable. After all, he joined a film about Mad Max, but ended up playing a secondary role, with Charlize Theron's character stealing the spotlight. After filming wrapped in 2012, Warner conducted several test screenings and decided to change the film's third act, prompting extensive reshoots. George Miller claimed that the studio was solely responsible for the film's weak dynamics in the last third, as they lengthened it and changed its ending. Reshoots increased the film's budget from $154 million to $185 million. When the studio management received the new version of the film, it turned out that the existing material couldn't be adapted to meet a PG-13 rating. The studio did try to do this. Miller and his wife Margaret Sixel, who worked as an editor on Mad Max, presented Warner with a kid-friendly, blood-free version of the film, but after seeing it, the studio opted for the R-rated version. Because of all the reshoots and the extensive editing, the premiere of Mad Max was postponed by over a year. The film was released on May 7, 2015, almost 4 years after production began. The film grossed $378 million in theaters, which is pretty good for an R-rated action film. However, that wasn't enough for Mad Max Fury Road to break even, because the studio spent another $100 million to promote the film. Insufficient box office returns were most likely the main reason for the lawsuit that broke out between Miller's production company and Warner Brothers. Miller demanded the $7 million that the studio had promised him as part of their agreement. Warner, in turn, argued that the terms of the agreement were violated, as Miller was supposed to produce a PG-13 film and stay within the $150 million budget. Naturally, when addressing those statements, Miller blamed the studio for inflating the budget by causing delays and insisting on reshoots. As for the rating, it was also the studio's decision to choose an R-rated version of the film rather than the PG-13 version that he had provided. It's hard to say whether these problems, combined with the film's long journey to the screens, seriously harmed the finished product. If Mad Max had been shot in 2003 as originally planned, it would have been a completely different film. For example, Miller considered making the film in black and white at one point. Regardless, we got an excellent film that certainly ranks among the best in terms of visual quality. Nowadays, there's a lot of information online about the next Mad Max movie. It is unclear, however, how the studio and Miller were able to work together again after all those difficulties and trials. What's truly unexpected is the direction that the studio and Miller chose for the film. Originally, the next film in the Mad Max franchise was supposed to be centered around Furiosa, played by Charlize Theron. And the new film will indeed be about Furiosa, but it will be about a younger Furiosa, who will be played by another actress rather than Theron. And this is despite Tom Hardy having a 3-film contract and Theron stating in all interviews that she would gladly return to the Mad Max universe. Unlike Tom Hardy, Theron had a great on-set relationship with Miller. The director let her do almost anything. For example, shaving her head was her idea. Miller envisioned the character wearing war paint and having long hair, but Theron suggested shaving the hair off. They were making a serious movie after all. Anyway, shifting to a prequel seems like a questionable decision. Perhaps the studio wanted to save money. A whole lot of money, in fact. Since Theron didn't have a contract, they would have to spend $15 to $20 million to secure her. This money can be saved by casting a younger actress. George Miller's age also raises concerns. He was 65 years old when he was working on Fury Road. Now he's in his late 70s. Is it possible to create a thrilling action film at his age? That's the question. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and stay tuned.